So, hello and welcome back yet again to this week's last evening with Mr. Ivanhoe. And it looks like this is actually a decently long chapter, so this will give you something to chew on over the weekend. Hopefully, the language won't trip me up. I feel like I'm getting a little bit more of a handle on it, but not always. I hope you guys are all doing well, and I hope you're looking forward to a wonderful weekend. If you are bored tomorrow night and feel like joining me for my live stream, I think I'm going to be streaming Phasmophobia. I'm going to be doing probably just some solo runs, but that game has kind of caught my attention, at least for now. It's a lot of fun. It's a ghost hunting game. There are some little jump scares and things. There's a lot of creepy atmosphere. And I'm getting better at not dying. So I don't know if that'll make it better or worse. Anyway, if you're bored tomorrow night, I stream every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. You're more than welcome to come and hang out with me. I will definitely say hello. But before we do anything else, it is time for Ivanhoe, where we're getting a little bit more of the political intrigue. It sounds like Prince John doesn't have entirely trustworthy people on his side, which is probably fair because he doesn't seem entirely trustworthy either. I got a comment yesterday that I have to agree with, that so far, and we don't know anything about Ivanhoe yet, so he is kind of an unknown quantity to me, but so far I haven't found any truly sympathetic characters. Isaac maybe a little bit, but the way he's written, he's not quite a caricature, but you know, we don't know him all that well yet. He was the most sympathetic so far. Maybe Robin of Locksley, maybe he's okay. I don't know yet. And hopefully Ivanhoe's a good character, but everybody else is kind of a mixed bag of ick. Anyway, the quote at the beginning of chapter 16 is from Parnell. I don't know if that's a person or a book, but that is where we are going to start reading Ivanhoe. Far and wild, unknown to public view, from youth to age a reverend hermit grew. The moss his bed, the cave his humble cell, his food the fruits, his drink the crystal well. Remote from man, with God passed his days, prayer all his business, all his pleasure praise. And that is from Parnell. At least that one I understood. And now it's time to jump back into chapter 16 of Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. The reader cannot have forgotten that the event of the tournament was decided by the exhortations of an unknown knight, who, on account of the passive and indifferent conduct which he had manifested on the former part of the day, the spectators had titled Le Noir Faineant. This knight had left the field abruptly when the victory was achieved, and when he was called upon to receive the reward of his valor, he was nowhere to be found. In the meantime, while summoned by heralds and by trumpets, the knight was holding his course northward, avoiding all frequented paths and taking the shortest route through the woods. He paused for the night at a small hostelry lying off the ordinary route, where, however, he obtained from a wandering minstrel news of the events of the tourney. On the next morning the knight departed early with the intention of making a long journey. The condition of his horse, which he had carefully spared during the preceding morning, being such as enabled him to travel far without the necessity of too much rest. Yet his purpose was baffled by the devious paths through which he was riding, so that when evening closed upon him, he found himself only on the frontiers of the West Riding of Yorkshire. By now, both horse and man needed refreshment, and it became necessary, moreover, to look out for some place in which they might spend the night, which was now fast approaching. The place where the traveler found himself seemed not good for obtaining either shelter or refreshment, and he was likely to be reduced to the usual expedient of knights errant, who on such occasions turned their horses to graze and laid themselves down to meditate upon their lady loves, with an oak tree as a roof. But the Black Knight either had no mistress to meditate upon, or, being as indifferent in love as he was in war, was not sufficiently occupied by passionate reflections upon her beauty and cruelty to be able to parry the effects of fatigue and hunger, and let love be a substitute for the comfort of a bed and supper. He felt dissatisfied, therefore, when, looking around, he found himself deep in the woods, through which indeed there were many open glades and a few paths, but such as seemed only formed by numerous herds of cattle which grazed in the forest, or by the animals of the chase and the hunters who made sport of them. The sun, by which the knight had chiefly been directing his course, had now sunk beyond the Derbyshire hills on his left, and every effort which he might make to pursue his journey was as likely to lead him out of his road as to get him along on his route. After having in vain tried to select the most beaten path, in hope that it might lead to the cottage of some herdsman or some other forester, and having repeatedly found himself unable to determine a choice, the knight resolved to trust to his horse, experiencing experience having upon former occasions made him acquainted with the wonderful talent possessed by horses for finding themselves and their riders a egress from such emergencies. This good steed, grievously fatigued with so long a day's journey under a rider which was encased in mail, had no sooner found by the slackened rein that he was abandoned to his own guidance than seemed to assume new strength and spirit. And whereas before he had scarce replied to the spur or anything else with anything other than a groan, the horse now, as if proud of the confidence reposed in him, pricked up his ears and assumed of his own accord a more lively forward motion. The path which the horse adopted rather turned off from the course pursued by the knight during the day, but since the horse seemed so confident in his choice, the rider gave himself over to the horse's discretion. And he was justified, for the footpath soon after appeared a bit wider and a bit more worn, and the tinkle of a small bell gave the knight to understand that he was in the vicinity of maybe a chapel, perhaps a hermitage. Accordingly, he soon reached an open plot of turf, on the opposite side of which a rock, rising from a gently sloping plain, offered its gray, weather-beaten front to the traveler. It was mantled in ivy along its sides in some places, and in others oaks and holly bushes whose roots found nourishment in the cliffs of the crag, and waved over the precipices below like the plumage of a warrior on top of his steel helmet, giving grace to that whose chief expression was terror. At the bottom of the rock, and leaning as it were against it, was built a rude hut, made chiefly of the trunks of trees felled in the neighboring forest, and secured against the weather by having its crevices stuffed with moss mingled with clay. The stem of a young fir tree, lopped of its branches, with a piece of wood tied across near the top, was planted upright by the door as a rude, rough, holy cross. At a little distance, on the right hand, a fountain of pure water trickled out of the rock, and was received in a hollow stone which labor had formed into a basin. Escaping from there, the stream murmured down the hillside by a channel which its course had long since worn, and so it wandered through a little plain to lose itself in the neighboring woodlands. Next to this fountain, were the ruins of a very small chapel, of which the roof had partially fallen in. The building, when it had been whole, had not been above 16 feet long by 12 feet in breadth, and the low roof rested upon four concentric arches which sprung from the four corners of the building, each supported upon a short, heavy pillar. The ribs of two of these arches remained, although the roof had fallen down between them. Over others it remained whole. The entrance to this ancient place of devotion was under a very low rounded arch, ornamented by several courses of that zigzag molding that looks like shark's teeth, which appears so often in more ancient Saxon architecture. A belfry rose above the porch on four small pillars, within which hung green and a weather-beaten bell, the feeble sounds of which had been some time before heard by the Black Knight. The peaceful and this entirely quiet scene lay glimmering in the twilight before the eyes of the traveler, giving him good assurance of lodging for the night, since it was the special duty of those hermits who dwelt in the woods to exercise hospitality towards benighted or bewildered travelers. And so accordingly, the knight took no time to consider minutely the particulars which we had detailed, but thanking St. Julian, the patron of travelers, who had sent him a good harbor, leapt from his horse and assailed the door of the hermitage with the butt of his lance, hoping to arouse attention and gain admittance. It was some time, however, before he obtained any answer, and the reply, when it was made, was not promising. "Pass on, whoever thou art," was the answer given by a deep voice from within, "and disturb not the servant of God and St. Dunstan in his evening devotions." "Worthy father," said the knight, "here is a poor wanderer, bewildered in these woods, who gives thee an opportunity of exercising thy charity and hospitality." "Good brother," said the inhabitant of the hermitage, "it has pleased Our Lady and St. Dunstan to destine me for the object of these virtues, instead of exercising them. I have no provisions here which even a dog could share with me, and a horse of any tenderness of nurture would despise my couch. Pass on. Godspeed." "But how," replied the knight, "how is it possible for me to find my way through such a wood as this, with darkness coming on? I pray, reverend father, as you are a Christian, undo your door, and at least point out to me your road." "And I pray you, good Christian brother," said the hermit, "disturb me no more. You have already interrupted one pater, two aves, and a credo, which I, miserable sinner that I am, should, according to my vow, have said before moonrise." "The road? The road," said the knight. "Give me directions for the road, if I can expect nothing else from you." "The road is easy to hit," said the hermit. "The path from the wood leads to a morass, and from thence to a ford, which, as the rains have now stopped, might be passable. When you have crossed the ford, you will take care for your footing, and go on the left bank, as it is a little bit treacherous, and the path which hangs over the river has lately, I learned, for I seldom leave my chapel, given way in a few places. After that, go straight forward." "A broken path, a cliff, a ford, and a morass," said the knight. "Sir hermit, if you were the holiest that ever wore the beard or told the bead, you shall scarce prevail upon me to hold this road tonight. I tell you that you, who lives by the charity of the country, ill deserved as I doubt it is, you have no right to refuse shelter to the wayfarer who is in distress. Either open the door, or by the rood I will beat it down and take entry myself." "Friend wayfarer," said the hermit, "be not inopportune. If you puttest me to use with the caracal weapon in my own defense, it will go badly for you." At this moment, a distant noise of barking and growling, which the traveler had for a while now heard, became extremely loud and furious, and made the knight suppose that the hermit, alarmed by his threat of making a forcible entry, had called upon his dogs, who had made this clamor to aid him. Incised. He, well, he lost his temper. Incensed at this preparation on the hermit's part for making good in his inhospitality, the knight struck the door so furiously with his foot that posts as well as the staples shook with violence. The hermit, not caring again to expose his door to a similar shock, called out, "Patience! Patience! Spare your strength, traveler, and I will presently undo the door, though it may be my doing so will little be to your liking." Accordingly, the door was open, and the hermit, a large, strong-built man, in his sackcloth gown and his hood, girt with a rope of rushes, stood in front of the knight. He had in one hand a lit torch, or a link, and in the other a baton of a crab tree, so thick and heavy it might be called a club. Two large shaggy dogs, half greyhound, half mastiff, stood ready to rush upon the traveler as soon as the door was opened, but when the torch glanced upon the lofty crest and the golden spurs of the knight who was outside, the hermit, altering probably his original intent, repressed the rage of his dogs, and changing his tone to a sort of unwilling courtesy, invited the knight to enter his hut, making excuse for all of his unwillingness to open his lodge after sunset by alleging that there were a lot of robbers and outlaws abroad, and those who gave no honor to Our Lady of St. Dunstan, nor to those holy men who lived their entire life in their service. "The poverty of your cell, good father," said the knight, as he looked around and saw nothing but a bed of leaves, a crucifix carved in oak, a missal with a rough-hewn table and two stools, made clear. "The poverty of your cell should seem a sufficient defense against any risk of thieves, not to mention the aid of two trusty dogs, large and strong enough, I think, to pull down a stag, and of course be more than a match for most men." "The good keeper of the forest," said the hermit, "hath allowed me the use of these animals to protect my solitude until times are mended." Having stated this, the hermit fixed his torch in a twisted branch of iron that served as a candlestick, and placing the oaken trivet before the embers of the fire, which he refreshed with a bit of wood, he placed a stool upon one side of the table and beckoned to the knight to do the same on the other. They sat and gazed with great gravity at each other, each thinking in his heart that he had seldom seen a stronger or more athletic figure than the one opposite him. "Reverend hermit," said the knight, after looking long and hard at his host, "were it not to interrupt your devout meditations, I would ask three things of your holiness. First, where should I put my horse? Second, what can I have for supper? And third, where am I to sleep tonight?" "I'll reply," said the hermit, "with my finger, it being against my rule to speak by words where signs can do." And so saying, he pointed successfully to two corners of the hut. "Your stable," he said, "is there. Your bed there, and," reaching down a platter with two handfuls of parched peas upon it from the neighboring shelf and putting it on the table, he said, "your supper's here." The knight shrugged, and, leaving the hut, brought in his horse, which in the interim he had fastened to a tree, unsaddled the horse with great attention, and spread upon the steed's weary back his own robe. The hermit was apparently somewhat moved to compassion by the anxiety as well as the address which the stranger displayed in tending to his horse, for muttering something about food left for the keeper's palfrey, he pulled out of a recess a bit of forage which he spread in front of the knight's charger, and immediately after shook down a quantity of dried ferns in the corner which he had assigned as the rider's bed. The knight gave him thanks for his courtesy, and this duty done, they both resumed their seats at the table, where stood the trencher of peas between them. The hermit, after a very long grace, which had been once Latin, but of which the original language few bits remained, except here and there the long rolling termination of some word or phrase, set an example to his guest by modestly putting into a very large mouth, furnished with teeth, which might have ranked with those of a boar in both sharpness and whiteness, 3 or 4 dried peas, a miserable grist, it seemed, for such a large and able mill. The knight, trying to follow such a laudable example, laid aside his helmet, his corslet, and the greater part of his armor, and showed to the hermit a head of thick curled yellow hair, high features, blue eyes, remarkably bright and sparkling, a well-formed mouth, having an upper lip clothed with mustaches darker than his hair, and bearing altogether a look of bold and daring, with which his strong body was well corresponded. The hermit, as if wishing to answer to the confidence of his guest, threw back his cowl and showed a round bullet head crown, surrounded by a circle of stiff curly black hair. It had something in the appearance of a parish pinfold begirt by its high hedge. The features expressed nothing of monastic austerity or ascetic privation. On the contrary, it was a bold, bluff face with broad black eyebrows, a well-turned forehead, and cheeks as round and red as that of a trumpeter, from which descended a long, curling black beard. Such a face, joined to the brawny form of this holy man, spoke rather of sirloins and haunches than peace and pulses. This incongruity did not escape his guest. After he had with great difficulty accomplished the mastication of a mouthful of dried peas, the knight found it absolutely necessary to request from his pious entertainer to bring him some liquor. The hermit replied to this request by placing in front of him a large can of pure water from the fountain. "It's from the well of St. Dunstan," he said, "in which between the sun and the sun he has baptized 500 heathen Danes and Britons, bless upon his name." And applying his black beard to the pitcher, he took a draught much more moderate in quantity than his encomium seemed to warrant. That's a word I didn't know. "It seems to me, Reverend Father," said the knight, "that the small morsels which you eat, together with this holy but thin beverage, have made you marvelously thrive. You appear a man more fit to win the ram at a wrestling match, or a ring and a bout of quarterstaff, or the bucklers at sword play, than to linger out your time in this desolate wilderness, saying masses, and living upon peas and cold water." "Sir Knight," said the hermit, "your thoughts, like those of the ignorant layman, are according to the flesh. It has pleased Our Lady and my patron saint to bless the pittance to which I restrained myself, even as the pulse and water were blessed to the children of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who drank the same rather than defile themselves with wine and meat which they were given by the King of the Saracens." "Holy Father," said the knight, "upon whose countenance it has pleased heaven to work such a miracle, permit a sinful man to ask your name?" "You may call me," said the hermit, "the clerk of Copmanhurst. That's what I'm called in these parts." They add, it is true, the name Holy, but I don't stand upon that, as being unworthy of being called holy. And now, Sir Knight, may I, pray ye, have the night of my honorable guest, or the name of my honorable guest?" "Truly," said the knight, "holy clerk of Copmanhurst. Men call me in these parts the Black Knight. Many, sir, add to that the name of Sluggard, whereby I am in no way ambitious to be distinguished." The hermit could scarce hide his smile. "I see," he said. "Sir Sluggish Knight, thou art a man of prudence and of counsel, and moreover, I see that my poor monastic fare doesn't really like you. You're accustomed, perhaps, to the license of courts and camps and the luxuries of the city. And now, I think me, Sir Sluggard, that when the charitable keeper of this forest walk left these dogs for my protection, and also these bundles of forage, he might have also left me some food, which being unfit for my use, the very remembrance of it has escaped me." "I dare be sworn that he did so," said the knight. "I was convinced that there must be better food in the cell, especially, holy clerk, since you first showed me your face. Your keeper is ever a jovial fellow, and none who beheld thy teeth contending with those peas, or your throat flooded with this ungenial water, could see you doomed to such horse food and horse beverage, and making you refrain from mending your cheer. So, what do you say we go to the keeper's bounty without delay?" The hermit cast a wistful look upon the knight, in which there was a sort of comic expression of hesitation, as if uncertain how far he should act prudently in trusting his guest. There was, though, as much of a bold frankness in the knight's face as it was possible to be expressed by his features. His smile, as well, had something in it that was irresistibly comic, and gave an assurance of faith and loyalty which the hermit could not refrain from sympathizing with. After exchanging a few mute glances, the hermit went to the far side of the hut and opened a hutch which was concealed with great care and ingenuity. Out of the recesses of a darkened closet, into which this aperture gave admittance, he brought out a large pastry, baked in a pewter platter of unusual dimension. This mighty dish he placed in front of his guest, who, using his poniard to cut it open, lost no time in making himself acquainted with the contents. "How long has it been since our good keeper friend has been here?" said the knight to his host, after having swallowed several hasty morsels of this reinforcement to the hermit's good cheer. "About 2 months," said the hermit. "By the true Lord," said the knight, "everything in this hermitage is miraculous, holy clerk, for I would have been sworn that the fat buck which furnished this venison had been alive a week ago." The hermit was somewhat discontented by this observation, and, moreover, he made but a poor figure while gazing on the dimensions of the pastry, which his guest was making desperate inroads on, a warfare in which his previous profession of abstinence left him no pretext for joining in decimating. "I've been in Palestine, Sir Clerk," said the knight, stopping suddenly, "and I bethink me it is a custom there that every host who entertains a guest shall assure him of the wholesomeness of his food by eating it along with him. Far be it from me to suspect such a holy man of being inhospitable. None the less, I would be highly bound if you would comply with this Eastern custom. To ease your unnecessary scruples, Sir Knight, I will, for once, depart from my own rules, said the hermit. And as there were no forks back then, his hands were instantly in the bowels of the pasty. With the ice of ceremony being broken, it seemed a matter of rivalry between the guest and the entertainer as who could display the largest appetite. And although the former had probably fasted the longest, the hermit surpassed him. Holy clerk, said the knight, when his hunger was appeased, I would gauge my good horse yonder against a zecchin that the same honest keeper to whom we are obliged for the venison might have left you wine, or maybe a runlet of canary, or some such trifle, by way of allaying this noble pasty. This would be a circumstance, doubtless, totally unworthy to dwell in the memory of such a rigid, holy man as you. Yet I think, were you to search that yonder crypt once again, you would probably find I was right. The hermit replied with a smile, and returning to the hutch, he produced a leather bottle which might contain about 4 quarts, and 2 large drinking cups made out of the horn of a cow hooped with silver. Having made this goodly provision for washing down their supper, he seemed to think no farther than a ceremonious scruple necessary. But, filling both of his cups, and saying in the Saxon fashion, "Washeigel, Sir Sluggish Knight," and he emptied his own in one gulp. "Drachheil, holy clerk," said the warrior, and did his host a reason in such a similar brimmer of drink. "Holy clerk," said the stranger, after the first cup had been swallowed, "I cannot but marvel that a man possessed of such thews and sinew as you, and who shows talent of such a good trencherman, would think of abiding by yourself in this wilderness. In my judgment, you are fitter to keep a castle or a fort, eating of the fat and drinking of the strong, than living here upon pulse and water, or even upon the charity of your keeper. At least, were I you, I should find myself both disport and plenty of the king's deer. There is many a goodly herd in these woods, and a buck will never be missed that goes to the use of St. Dunstan's chaplain." "Sir Sluggish Knight," said the clerk, "these are dangerous words, and I pray you take them back. I am a true hermit to the king and the law, and were I to spoil my liege's game, I would be sure of prison, and my gown would not save me even of hanging. Nevertheless, if I were you," said the knight, "I would take my walk by moonlight, when foresters and keepers are warm in bed, ever and ever anon. As I said my prayers, I would let fly a shaft among the herds of deer that feed in the glades. Tell me, holy clerk, have you never practiced such a pastime?" "Friend sluggard," said the hermit, "thou hast seen all that can concern you about my housekeeping, and something more than he deserves who takes up quarters by violence. Credit me, it is better to enjoy the good which God sends you than to be curious as to how it came there. Fill your cup and be welcome, and do not, I ask you, ask me any further impertinent questions. Put me to show that you can hardly have made good your lodging if I had wanted to oppose you." "Faith," said the knight, "you make me more curious than ever. You are the most mysterious hermit I've ever met, and I will know more about you before we part. As for your threats, Know, holy man, that you speak to one whose trade it is to find danger wherever it is. Well, sir sluggish knight, I drink to thee, said the hermit, respecting your valor, but deeming wondrous slightly about your discretion. If you will take equal arms with me, I will give thee in all friendship and brotherly love such sufficing penance and complete absolution that you will not for the next 12 months have the sin of curiosity ever again. And the knight agreed and said, Name your weapons. There is none, said the hermit. From the scissors of Daleth and the tenpenny nail of Jael to the cimeter of Goliath, at which I am not your equal. But if I am to make the election, what sayest thou to these? And thus speaking, he opened yet another hutch and took out from it a couple of broadswords and bucklers, such as were used by the yeomen of the period. The knight, who watched the motions, observed that this second place of concealment was furnished with 2 or 3 good longbows, a crossbow, a bundle of bolts for the crossbow, and a half a dozen sheaves of arrows for the longbow, a harp, and other matters of very uncanonical appearance were also visible when the recess was opened. I promise you, brother, said the knight, I will ask thee no more offensive questions. The contents of that cupboard are an answer to all of my questions, and I see a weapon there. And here he stood and pulled out the harp, on which I would more gladly prove my skill against you than a sword and a buckler. Well, I hope, sir knight, said the hermit, thou hast given no good reason for thy surname of sluggard. I do promise you, I suspect you grievously. None the less, you are my guest, and I will not put your manhood to the test without your own free will. Sit down, then, and fill your cup. Let us drink and sing and be merry. If you know a good song that will be welcome to a nook of pasty at the Coppenhurst so long as I serve in the chapel of St. Dunstan, as it pleases God, it will be until I change my gray covering for one of green. That's how long I will stay here. But come, fill your flagon, for it will carve some time to tune the harp, and nothing pitches your voice and sharpens your ear like a cup of wine. For my part, I love to feel the grape at the ends of my fingers before I make the harp strings tinkle. And that is where the chapter ends. Okay, going with all of the tropes that I can think of, I think we just met Friar Tuck. Because this hermit doesn't seem all that pious in anything other than show. But he also doesn't seem lecherous like Prior Aymer. So maybe he's not a bad guy. It also sounds like his patron, if we're following all of the conventions and tropes that are in my head, his patron is probably Robin of Locksley. But I guess we'll have to wait and see, won't we? That was pretty good. I stumbled over a few of the phrases because they made very little sense in my brain, but I think that was quite enjoyable, and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you as always for joining me. Please do hit the thumbs up on your way out. It does always make me smile, and I will see you on Monday.